How are you guys doing? I hope you're well. I'm fine too. Thanks for asking. We're back to our morning routine. It's about 1:30 in the morning. Yeah, so yeah, good morning. You guys, I've been really struggling with consistency. This feels like a very, very dangerous terrain for me. Consistency, I won't say I'm a perfect being or that I'm able to work through everything that I set my heart to do. But I'm pretty much tenacious at things, but for some reason, I've been struggling, especially with recording this year. It's been a struggle, but I'm not one to back away from the challenge. So, anyways, you guys, today's episode I'm going to try for it not to be too long. We won't do much today. But before we go into today's book, you guys, I just finished the Dan Brown book, Inferno. You guys know that Dan Brown is always a hit, back to back. I don't think I've had a bad read that I've had a bad read any of Dan Brown's books that it's been a bad read. The only book that I would say that I read that was just not up to par with the other ones that I used to read. It's probably Digital Fortress. And even then it wasn't like it was bad or I didn't enjoy it. It was just that I didn't get the euphoria that I normally would get from his book. But notwithstanding, it was a very good read. And this didn't disappoint. I think it's the fourth in the Robert Langdon series. And no, you guys. I don't know how he comes up with all of the things he writes. Like how he just create. To be fair, authors are very, very creative. And the beautiful thing about reading Dan Brown's book is it's so rich in history. Like, and you can tell that he really did his research. He did his research. Like, there is no stone left unturned in his books. And I find that half of the time, I said more than half of the time, whenever I read his books, most of the facts, the history that are in his book, they are factually correct. I guess that's a given considering the protagonist is supposedly an art professor and art lecturer, but then they are very, very accurate and 90% on point. And it just feels like you're reading a textbook more than, or rather than a textbook, it's like you're being teleported back in time to the moment those things occur or when they happen. But notwithstanding, I just really, really love his books. The only thing that is that they're quite complicated. So reviewing them sometimes just feels like it's going to be a chore, and sometimes, most times, actually, they're often rooted in science fiction in a way. But there was one thing I realized in this book that I read last, this Inferno, that's the title of this one, is that from all of his characters and from all of his stories that I've read, I've come to realize that with great genius comes a little bit of madness. I've just come to see it. I haven't really exactly met with a lot of geniuses or servants real life, but I've come to see that pattern in most of the books that I read that involves geniuses, servants, even psychopaths. There was a research that I read or that I heard that says that it's just 1% difference between a genius and is it a social no a psychopath. I think that's just a 1% difference that differentiates them. And reading some of Dan Brown's books and some other books that involves servants, extreme geniuses, I come to understand that aspect, that research. I'm not sure how true that is, how true that particular statement is, but it makes some kind of sense. Because when you read, especially when you read this particular series, the Robert Langdon series, Da Vinci Code, Lost Symbol, Inferno, um there's one other one in between, I've forgotten the name. You realize that most of the time this the antagonist that is the main villain, they are really intelligent geniuses, servants, like people that they know their right from their left and they are turning the world upside down. I think it's just the way their brain works. It sees things in very vivid, weird way than an average person will see it. And I think it's one of the reasons why I find the mind the mind really mind blowing. But anyways, that's not where we're going. I just felt the need to just talk about it. That you guys, I had a good read. I've been having good reads back to back. We're back. I haven't had a bad read in a while. I'm proud of myself for this task. So, drum rolls. To our book for today, we'll be talking about The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Ita Morris. So, it's a novel. It's a fictional novel, but based on real life experience. So yes, it's a story. It's a fiction story. It's a fictional book, but it was based on real life events. Itamari, obviously not Itamori's events, but it follows the story. In summary, it follows the story of Lale Soklo. Hey, wait, oh, you guys, sorry, oh, I think I butchered that. It follows the story of Lale Sokolov. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that Lale, but let's hope that's the right pronunciation for it. And Lale is a Slovak Jewish man, and this is just basically it just tells the story of the Holocaust. Leo, oh my Leo's account of the Holocaust. Although, according to the author, and actually when you read the book, you actually realize that too. It doesn't exactly give detailed experiences or detailed how events of the Holocaust. More like it tells the story, this one person's story, this one person's experience, considering the fact that they even escaped the concentration camp, so he didn't die there or anything. So he escaped enough to be able to tell the story for Ita Morris to write. I forgot to talk about their author. Ita Morris is from New Zealand. I didn't really do much on her, as she isn't exactly, she just wrote his story. But Leo oh my goodness, Sokolov. This occurred in 1942. It tells the story of Leo Sokolov. He was a Slovak Jewish man. And then in Auschwitz, the concentration camp during the World War II. You guys, you know that I'm a sucker for historical fiction, especially one that has poignant themes, and this one too didn't disappoint. For some reason, I think I find myself being drawn to Holocaust stories, Afghanistan, Iran, all of those things. They're so heartbreaking, and in a way, in a weird way, I feel like I tax myself in a way, or that I feel like it's mandatory, or I mandate myself to remember, to just learn about these things, to learn about these people, what they went through, what they suffered. Because I know that no matter how detailed, no matter how good the writer, the author is, or how good the victim narrates their stories enough for people to adapt, it doesn't even cover a third of the or quarter of the things they suffered. And this particular book, this Tattooist of Auschwitz, it gives you an inkling, an insight into this person's story. This is, at least this one survived. This particular man survived enough for him to tell his story, for someone to write it down, to adapt it. I think there is a movie adaptation. But then, ah, even then, even still, they're just really heartbreaking. They're just really heartbreaking. I don't know why I find myself drawn to those kind of stories, but it just feels like someone has to remember these people for some reason. And I'm glad that they write their stories, or they tell their stories and allow and permit for these stories to be broadcasted, to be told, to be written, to be adapted. There are people who tell their stories quite alright, but and they do not feel comfortable about it being told to the world, at the very most, probably to their family or their children or their descendants. But I like that these stories are written, or they were, just for us to have an understanding of how far the world has come, and sometimes just to remind you also of the cruelty of humanity. Because when I think about the Holocaust, Nazi Germany, World War II, this Adolf Hitler, I keep thinking about it. I've read journals, I've Wikipedia, asked ChatGPT, and just to give an account or a recount of the things that happened. When you think about some of the things that you read, you find out that there wasn't a particular reason, like, or they the reasons were not genuine enough for that kind of cruelty and wickedness towards a particular section, a particular demographic of mankind. You go back, I think you go back to, it's like going back to what I said, that when you look at great geniuses or people with great mind, there's a hint of madness in it. Like it just comes with some sort of madness or some sort of abnormality or something that just defies the normal or a good moral compass. Because when I think about it, when I read these stories, sometimes we'll read all of these stories and they are just coined from what people have heard over time or what people have read. But it drives a point home, or it just gives a sort of, I don't know, it carries a sort of weight when this time around it is a person's story, a real, like, this person lived, this person was alive enough to say, to recount their experience, to recount their stories. I think it just changes it in a way compared to when someone just coins or comes up with it, fictional characters, fictional words, and all of that. But no, this is real. The names are real. If you Google search it, apparently I Google searched it and everything. And even the other characters that were mentioned in the book that are protagonists related with, they, if one Google searches it, they come out there, and it just goes to show you how far the world has come or how far history has come. I digress. But you guys, I just needed to get that off my chest. Funny how I have this book isn't a recent read. I think I read it. I read it in it was in my April read. I didn't even read it in May. It was in April. But as with poignant books, they stay with you for a long time. And sometimes your mind just drifts back there and like, oof, I read something like this. So basically, it follows Lale Sokolov is our tattooist, and even from his own story, following his own story, according to him, he wasn't even taken forcefully. He went, should I say, voluntarily and for the sake of his family. I think there was an announcement that for men that and that volunteer to go to the concentration camps, that they will spare their families, their aged fathers and mothers and whatnot. So Leo went voluntarily, but if you think about it, I don't think that's volunteering, to be honest. If you are, no one would have another option, a better option, and decide to say, oh, okay, yes, the place I want to go and volunteer is a concentration camp that people over 1 million, it was documented that over 2 million people were deported to that camp. Imagine. I think there are even pictures online, and there are people that go there for excursions and whatnot. And when you see how small that place was compared to the population, the amount of people that were deported there, no food, nothing, nothing. It's very, very heartbreaking. So, and one thing that I loved about this book again, I loved this. I think it was interwoven. Love was the major thing. I think that's another thing that just made it just really sit with me. But anyways, let's just finish out our summary before we go out to our themes. So it follows the story of Lale. He was deported to Auschwitz, and he was a tattooist. He was responsible for marking identification numbers on prisoners' arms. So for them to recognize people that are missing or people that want to run away. You can see how cruel they were. Not even their names. Oh. Imagine that dehumanization, tattooing numbers on human beings, on their arms and whatnot. That was just, and so, but we see that this position gives him slightly, just a slight freedom, not much, just something, just slightly from others. And we see that while walking, Leo comes across, he meets Gita. Is it Gita or Gita? I don't know. Let's go with Gita. Gita. These names could be hard. I don't know. I hope I'm pronouncing them well. Another prisoner. She also is a female prisoner. She's Jewish as well, and their relationship blossoms and becomes the core. Actually, their relationship was the core. It becomes the core of the story, and we see how they were able to maneuver their way amidst brutality, hunger, hope, and survival. And now they formed a bond rooted in love, hope, determination, just to see life beyond Auschwitz. It's funny how you like. Emotions are just a funny set of things, because you would emotions like love that seems like such a privilege or such a big issue is something that will blossom in that kind of harsh, unlivable circumstances. But then life has other things. So now we're going to our themes. One of the themes that we're exploring in this book is love. And not just love, but love as a defiance. So we see that one of the first thing after like the first few pages or the few chapters that you read when you start this book, the next thing that you are being plunged into is this love story, this love trend. And we see a blossom between okay, we agree Gita and Lil. And you know the beautiful thing about this love emotional story, it isn't exactly love in that conventional sense. I mean, this is the type of love and relationship where they cannot even see them, they must not see them working together. They can't work together. Like, oh, like we are walking together on the road or by the street. That cannot happen. So imagine that kind of situation. So it's not romance or this type of emotional story in a conventional sense, but it was love that was built on resistance. That yes, it's not allowed, but we will love each other regardless. I don't know. I feel like I'm not doing justice to this their story, or to the emotional side, or the weight of this type of unconventional love, especially happening in that kind of circumstance, in that kind of situation. I mean, there was no food. People were dying of starvation. Oh. Like they were dying of starvation, dying of thirst. They had to work. They barely had time to sleep. All they did was work and sleep. And that work took about 90% of the time. And they had a place where some one person drops dead from overworking, or overexertion. No one looks back. They just carry the corpse and just throw them on an heap. I think they burn them or they transport them. So imagine the kind of harsh, unlivable circumstances, and love buds in the midst of it. It blossoms. And the love is not even that type of love again that is conventional, but one that comes off as defiance. We see how Lale and Jita, how they resist. And there was a defiance to their love. And oh my god, I feel like I'll just keep using adjective and continue. So it's not exactly romance. It is love, but there wasn't romance, but it was more of continuity. It's like choosing to invest in someone in a place that was designed to strip you of your identity, your future, your connection. Imagine a place where there is no hope that you would live till tomorrow. That is how bad the concentration camps were. That no one could hope, no one could dream that you could die before tomorrow morning from a host of things: starvation, brutality from your group head or people that were asked to monitor you guys. So imagine love being choosing to invest emotionally in that kind of thing, in that kind of identity, in that kind of situation. Sometimes people that don't read, they mock us readers, especially romance book, people that really love romance books, and say that we have such high standard of love, or such unrealistic standard of what relationship is. And I get that when you're talking about fictional book. But what about books like this that are rooted in people's experiences? And I will forever not lower my standard. I'll forever continue to think of love in such big standard, in such way and manner, in such way that defies conventionality, the normal conventional, the normal thing that people say. Because how do you still invest in a person, in a relationship, when there is no hope for tomorrow? When there's no, even if you manage to live safe, you don't know what your future would seem like. You don't even know your identity. The women were had their hairs cut. They had no hair. They couldn't keep their hair, so they had their hair cut. They had no names. No one knew anyone's names unless people that you were close with. And even getting close to someone a risk that some people decided not to take because they could die tomorrow, they could die next week, they could die. No, the future wasn't guaranteed. And we see how their relationship, it wasn't romance, it wasn't sexual, there wasn't tension, it was just love in its purest form, in the ways that you can imagine, quietly pushing and resisting that system. And you see how that love carries all through the book. And you can see that you can it's even safe to say or to deduce that Lale and Jita survived that concentration camp because of the love they had for each other. At some point, Jita almost died safe, and it was because of the love that Lale had for Jita, that she was dead. But because he kept going ahead, he kept doing all that he could do, just that no, she cannot die. Oh. She must not die. Oh. And we see how that love brought them, how that love just quietly, how it just helped them, should I say, cross that avalanche of sea or of waves. Well, I don't even know what to call it, but it's just beautiful. And it makes you just think that if love could exist in such a pure form, in those kind of harsh conditions, unlivable, insurvivable conditions or instances, situation, why has love become something else in a world where I mean, I could go on and on, man. I really could go on and on. So yeah, our next thing that I love, that I want that we have to talk about, is survival. I think that's a very, very common thing for all of these books, historical fictions, all of these things. You see whoever our protagonist is, and even other side characters, some even the ones that didn't survive in the book, sometimes you see what survival means. And often I think another thing that these things, why it screams at me, or why I see it so much, is because for some reason I can relate to it so well. Maybe not in that manner, in that capacity, but the idea of surviving in a world, more obviously I can never, my situations or whatever it is I might be going through can never compare. But I just feel like I can understand, or I see where they're coming from. You can see that when we read the book, we see how Lale survives. He had almost died self at the first part of the book. One of the things that helped him survive was the fact that he was a tattooist. He was the one tattooing people. So he gave him position. And even then, he was still, the position didn't exactly grant him freedom or immunity. No, at the very most, it just gave him a little, slightly, just very, very little, nothing too much freedom. And we see how he used that freedom, how he used that little that little advantage that he had, how he used it for the good and the betterment of everyone around him, and how it eventually worked for him. And we see survival in its uncomfortable layers. There was a particular story of I think Jita's friend too, that she had to be the general's concubine. It was just, this is even outside of Leo's survival. We see survival of other characters, and just so in such uncomfortable layers, in such layers that just feels like, this is just, is this humanity? At that moment I just kept praying that, God, please, may I not just go see things, or may war not break out, because and in the advent of war, when war occurs, it's never the people who are responsible for the breakout of war aren't the victims, or they aren't the casualties. It's people that didn't know anything, people that have not heard anything, people that have not seen anything, that are actually casualties of that war. We can imagine now, we see even this our Nigeria, we see how things are going on, we see what are going on. You would think that kidnappers or these things, or the worst of the worst that happen, will happen to people in governmental positions, that they have the power to enact change but have refused to do that. You would think all of these bad things will come to their doorstep, but no, it's innocent people, children that have not even been fully weaned, that are going through this worst case, and sometimes you will hear some stories and you be like, this is the worst that can happen. Before you know it, you wake up the next day, you hear another story and you be like, so you're telling me the horror story I heard previously was even worse, it's not even as bad as this one that I'm hearing. And still yet, there's that human instinct just to survive, just fight your way through it. That's the another, I don't even know if I should call it beautiful thing. I don't know if it's beautiful thing, but it's something that stood out, that every story that I've read, even books outside of war that are not historical fictions, but that has the protagonist or the main character as is in the midst of some situations, some things that are going on, you would think that with how tough that situation is, they want to kill themselves, they want to know. If anything, the instinct to survive is more powerful. Oftentimes it supersedes or it overpowers the need to give up. That's one thing that just blows my mind, that you would think that yes, there are people who go through things and they take the suicidal route. Me, I've never been a person that puts blame on people or say that they are selfish. I really do not do that. But when you read these things or when you even hear accounts of people's stories, you realize that more often than not, most times this instinct to survive, to fight for survival, to want to get through this, oftentimes supersedes or overpowers the one that just says, you know what, I'm tired, I can't do it again. And we see that in this book too. That comes up in this book, and how survival and moral compass, I don't know if I should say they're interchangeable or if they parallel, or one equates the other, but you could just juxtapose the both. Survival and moral compass are, in the bid to survive, what do you lose? Who do you become? How do you become someone else? And we see that with Lale, how he had to compromise on some things. Sometimes not even physical per se, it could morally, just for survival, and not just his own survival, but survival of others. That was very, very, very beautiful to see. Then another thing that I saw was dehumanization and identity. In fact, I don't think there's need to say it. I think I've mentioned it in almost all my sayings since we started talking about it. The dehumanization. Jesus. Holocaust is one of the worst things that happened in human history. Holocaust, the black slavery, the slavery of the black people is one of the worst things in the history of humanity, in the history of mankind. There are really bad things that have happened though, but my Jesus, when you recount people's stories, there are a lot of stories about Jewish survivors. When you recount them, in fact, you watch adaptation like this, you watch some adaptations and they are just downright horrorful. And you'll be like, people actually went through this. Some actually survived and lived after this. Ah, my goodness. And you see how Auschwitz reduced people's numbers, how we stripped them of their identity. The women's hair were cut, they had no hair, they wore like sack kind of things. You don't know their names, they didn't bear names. They had numbers for identity. Imagine someone scrapping off your name and tattooing a number on your arm as a means of identity. That's just dehumanization in one of the worst forms. But you can still see how Lale and the book gives us characters, and these characters, how they resist that reduction. Not just the characters alone, and maybe it's the way the author wrote it, maybe it's the way she wrote the story. You can tell that you can see that she's trying to tell us that Auschwitz tried to reduce these people's identity. He tried to strip them of who they were. He tried to strip them of humanity. But you could also see the author counteracting that reduction. Maybe it's the author's works, maybe it's the character that just reflected the work the author wrote. I can't even exactly explain it, but you can see us seeing names, we see stories, we see relationship that was quietly and even strongly, if I may add, resisting that reduction. So every act of tattooing becomes paradoxical, a tool of dehumanization that also, you know, ends up preserving their identity, because even if the prisoners are erased or they are dead, they are not erased even in death. So you see how you see that juxtaposition, that though this tattooing of you of people, tattooing numbers on them dehumanizes them, it's still paradoxical in a way that it preserves their identity, that even when in death they are not erased. It's very weird. It's a weird way to look at it, but it also makes sense. And and again, another thing that I saw, this was me, in fact, not just Lil, but every major other characters in the books, and we see humanity in the face of dehumanization. And I know that, sometimes it was a human that put them in the situation they were in anyways. But then at the same time, you see small acts of kindness and humanity. We see how Leo helps people, how we fed people, how we fed prisoners by exchanging properties of incoming prisoners that he found for food, and how we shared it. That small act of kindness, it was some of the food that I shared that helped some of those prisoners to survive or still the next day, or still to the next week, or to the next month, and even some to survive. It was from that act of kindness, one of those exchanging of prison incoming prisoners' properties, that I was able to save the life of some of the prisoners that were at the point of death. And it just shows how the good and the bad of humanity, that as much as there is good, there is the evil, there is the bad side of humanity. You cannot deny the good side as well. And it just gets you thinking that it's just so weird how humanity isn't without the good and the bad. Every Almost every worst thing that has happened in the story of mankind originated from one exceptionally cruel person, one greedy person, one person that just came up with the most absurd idea that grew into insanity and madness. And in the midst of that cruelty, that madness, you see random little acts of kindness. And in that act of kindness, I couldn't help but be reminded of the book Thief. I couldn't help but be reminded about it. And unlike in this scenario, in this particular book, where we are looking at the Holocaust from the angle of the Jews, the book Thief was looking at the Holocaust from the German's angle, but this is from the angle of the Jews. And it just, I just could, and I think in a way, should I say, it gave me a little hope in humanity, that humanity can be cruel, human beings can be evil and be mean and be all of those negative things. I felt a type of hope that even in spite of that, there is still good in humans. There are humans that are still good, even in the face of that kind of experience, that kind of dehumanization, that kind of insurvivable situations. Good can still rise up. And again, hope is always a strong thing, always has always been a strong thing in all of these books that we read. Hope has always been a strong thing. And it's very funny, because you would, like I said, in when we're talking about survival, you would expect that in the face of such unsurvivable circumstances, all these positive like kind of feelings are the least things, or they are very hard to have. They are very hard to have. And the bittersweet thing about hope is that hope is not always uplifting, especially in this book. Actually, at least in context to this book, hope is not always uplifting. If anything, it is survival in a way. It's just like, okay, come what me, whether I survive or not. And we see how double-edged hope was in this book. Sometimes Hope keeps people alive. It helps you to say that okay, I'll keep on going, I'll keep on living. No matter what comes, I'll try, I must survive this. But at the same time, it keeps them exposed. When you hope, you become, it makes loss heavier, it makes waiting harder. Everything is harder. It's not easy. Hope isn't easy. It is more complex because one thing hope is, when you have hope, when you are thinking of hope, when it's not certainty that things will get better. You're not certain. There isn't certainty. Oh. It is just, should I say, imagination and giving yourself something to lean on. That is what hope is in a way. Hope doesn't guarantee certainty. In fact, I like to think that it really, you can call it hope when you are okay with the uncertainty of the future, with the fact that I might not survive this concentration camp. I might die in this concentration camp. According to the book, I might end up not seeing my, it's possible that that won't happen, but still I'm still going to keep fighting. I'm still going to live every day. Even if I feel like I might die, I'm still going to take more breath. And that's the positive side of hope. That's the good part, the good aspect of hope. But then you see the other aspect. Your heart grows heavier. Waiting becomes harder. Imagine in the face of that uncertainty where a maniacal head, all those people, I've forgotten the name they gave them, those people that were tasked to look over them, they were sectionalized, could just wake up and decide that they just want to kill you people for fun. So like, my goodness. And you know the thing that just wrenches my heart in all of this is that this is not a made up story. This is actually retelling a story. This is story that is being retold by someone that lived it. By someone that lived it. There were others like him that lived, and there were others that didn't survive. I just imagining them. I try to imagine it, put myself in that shoe. But no matter how much my imagination, how vivid it can be, it's shoes that I can never come up with. And it's just very, very, you guys, I'm lost for words, man. I really, 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 really am. I really am. So I promised you we're not going to get, this wasn't going to get long, but it's already getting there. But overall, we see all of these things. And one common pattern that I've seen in all of these books, all of these fictional stories that are being retold, is that at the end of the day, survival is a innate human instinct. It's just in there. It's just in there. I think I've read in some evolutionary story that is one of the way things that has helped humanity or humans evolve. That survival, that instinct to keep living. And hope is such a great thing. It's so enormous, and it's such, I don't know what word to, the adjective to use for it. It's an action, is a noun, is everything in, is such a big word, and it shouldn't even be trifled with, to be very honest. And we see the essence of hope. I think the one thing that made this book less saddening for me or bittersweet was because they survived it, even though they were separated at some point. That's Lale and Jita, after they sent them away and the war was finally over, and they lost contact, they didn't see each other for a while. They ended up finding each other, they got married and even had kids. So much so that, and he lived long. I think he lived quite a long, that's Lale. He lived long enough. I think he lived to a ripe old age. Enough to even tell his story, for someone to write it, for the book to be written and to be adapted into a movie. I think it's more like up up in your face Hitler. I loved that aspect. That was how I saw it though. That was how I saw it, that up yours, you Hitler. I know you tried to dehumanize us, you tried to take our hope away, you tried to do all the cruel things only a cruel person can do to his normal fellow human. We survived, at least for the survivors, and my heart broke for those that didn't. And My goodness. You guys, if I continue, I'll just keep going. I'll just keep going on and on and on. But at the end of the day, it just scares me too that I wonder. I just scares me. It makes it very scary when I hear news about wars, nuclear wars. This person and this person is fighting. That at the end of the day, is the innocent people that suffer the aftermath. Not just aftermath, the ongoing math sef of these situations, of this war, of these stories. But man, the world scares me, humanity scares me, human scares me. Is how someone, if a reasonable seemingly person can just go mad in the name of genius. For me, it just, I can't help but keep reiterating or going back to the statement that I made about Dan Brown, that one thing I've come to learn about people or geniuses, great geniuses, or people that seem to have intelligence that supersedes that of an average person, is madness. It comes with insanity. It was a rude awakening and a very, very weird thing to come to discover. Although I came across that conclusion through books and stories and movies, but when I should I say, I compared it to the few instances of reality that I've come across, I couldn't help but actually be much more certain in my deduction and in my thoughts that, to be fair, that's true. Great geniuses, great intelligence, great minds comes with a bit of insanity. It just makes you wonder about a lot of things, to be very honest. So you guys, at least this one didn't end up in such sad tale or such bittersweet. They had their troubles after, in their living of their lives. I think they had their issues when I Google searched and tried to research life after when they got married. But they had kids, they had children, and just things that people go through navigating life. Well, that's that about that. I don't know what we'll be doing next episode, but we've not had Bible study in a long time. We are due for Bible study, so most likely we'll be studying. We'll be doing Bible study. But yeah, you guys, thank you for rocking with me. Is that what I normally say? I can't remember. Anyways, I'll be seeing you guys. No, you guys will be hearing from me. I remember that one. All right, we'll be drawing the curtains for the day. Bye.